flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J.N. Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to Researcher on a Mission Radio, ROAM. I'm your host, Dr. J, and as always, we have an awesome show for you today. Bringing you the most requested guest of all time is the one and only Richard Dolan. He is not only a researcher, a real researcher, someone who actually goes out to archives, sends letters, FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. He's an author. He's a lecturer. He's a radio host, a historian, and so much more. Today is going to be an exhilarating show, and it is an honor to have you back. Mr. Dolan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. J. I didn't realize I was the most requested guest on your program. I had no idea.
You absolutely are. Every time your name comes up, it is people's eyes literally light up and want to know when you're going to return and when you're going to be on next. So
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Now,
this with you.
This is the first thing is going to be a little off UFOs, but there's going to be a tie-in in UFOs on your radio show, which airs Monday nights. You spoke about government lies, and you brought up ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now, here's my theory. For 13 years, ever since 9/11, we've been pounded Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda this, Al-Qaeda that, bombing these leaders and second in command and drone strikes. But all of a sudden, we haven't heard a word of Al-Qaeda in the last 6 months, and there comes ISIS. Can you tell us what you think about that?
Yeah, one of two things for sure. I think I have my opinion about which one it is, but at the best thing that you can say relating to U.S. policy and ISIS, the best thing is that ISIS was created by sheer incompetent stupidity in U.S. national security strategy, and by that I'm just saying that the bombing into smithereens of Iraq, which let us remind ourselves from back in 2003, had no justification, even though the world was told that there was justification in the form of weapons of mass destruction, which turned out to be fictitious. So Iraq should never have been invaded on that basis, ever. The U.S. invasion of Iraq decimated the infrastructure of that nation. There would never have been a true kind of Islamic radicalization. So that's one thing. And the other thing is the U.S. insistence, starting with the Arab Spring in 2011, to take out the regime of Bashar al-Assad of Syria. This is flat-out regime change, and this has been discussed in high policy circles for many years. They wanted him gone. Israel wants him gone. And so this was the opportunity to do it. And what they did was to initiate, they wanted to do airstrikes, and then the world bucked against that, but they did a variety of other things to undermine the Syrian regime. And that opened the door for what is called the Islamic State. And in particular, many of those radicals receive weaponry indirectly and I think directly from U.S. sources. So indirectly, we know from U.S. has this fiction that there are so-called moderate rebels in Syria. That's fiction. If there are any, they're insignificant. And the U.S. has this idea that, well, we must support them. And ISIS ends up getting all of their stuff. And then there have been claims, and these are not officially acknowledged, but there's a lot of these floating around out there, that the CIA, in fact, directly funded ISIS. Certainly Turkish intelligence, which is a NATO country, directly supported ISIS as well. So that's the worst. That's the best, rather, is that it's utter incompetence. The worst thing you can say is probably the most realistic, which is that ISIS needed to exist because this is a war economy, and Osama bin Laden's dead now, officially dead. And you're right, we hadn't been hearing much about Al-Qaeda, and suddenly, I mean, think of it this way: if you are someone who's got the ear of policymakers, if you're a major defense contractor, if you're a member of the Carlyle Group, or if you attend Bilderberg meetings and you own a defense industry or a major part of a defense industry, the fact is that war is in your interest. And the fact is also that through the so-called Carlyle Group and others, that these are major military groups, Bechtel and the like. They've had a enormous influence in U.S. policy, so they're making a fortune right now on this whole ISIS business, the airstrikes and all of that. So it's a war business. War is a racket, as General Smedley Butler of the U.S. Marines said many, many, many years ago.
You actually took the words right out of my mouth and my brain, for that matter. When I studied economics in my undergrad, that was my major, and one of my preeminent professors, I brought in a person that she was dating, a former CIA agent, and he came in and said, does everyone know what CIA stands for? And everyone says, yes, Central Intelligence Agency. And he said, no, Cocaine Import Agency. That's a whole other story. That's how they fund the black ops. But she said, how do you fix an economy? Easy. Start a war. We're going to create jobs to build munitions. We're going to send troops over there and give them jobs. We're going to have contracts to pay everything from their shoelaces to their bullets to their uniforms to their Coca-Cola, you name it. And then after we bomb the hell out of a country, we go back and fix it. And just like you said, this is a war-based economy, which is really sad. The other thing, going back to ISIS and this whole new creation, which I think is more of a threat than they're saying, I think it's more because of fear. When they put us in fear, they keep us in control. And this is why I was saying we didn't necessarily start with UFOs, but this just goes on to prove the manipulation that the government has over us and the lies they purport. What do you think?
Yes.
So what do you think about that? If people finally understand that this is nothing but a fear-mongering lie with ISIS, what do you think that it could do to awaken people's eyes within the fact of understanding that, wait a minute, we've been visited, and all this ridicule and everything else set forth by the CIA, which, as a matter of fact, I'm sure you know this from Freedom of Information Act requests, they were told, they issued statements to tell people to basically ridicule, deny, and everything along those lines of any proper citing. And when it came down to it, if they couldn't even do that, then to dismantle that person's credibility. Yeah. And so it all goes back down to the same thing. The government can lie. The government can keep secrets.
Yes, absolutely. You have a lot of interesting thoughts in that last statement. So let me just deal with them. The last point about the CIA and UFO policy, this has gone back into the early 1950s. We know this for a fact. Back in early 1953, something known as the Robertson Panel. This was a CIA organized meeting of top-level scientists. Some of them were Nobel Prize winners. And their job was to look at UFO reports and decide what policy ought to be at the classified level. That was their official function. Unofficially, what we know is that the policy recommendations were written before that panel even met, if you can imagine. And the policy recommendations were that, just as you say, the U.S. government was to promote a policy of debunking, that was the word they used, and education of the public about the fictitious nature of UFOs, flying saucers, and they were going to work through the media to do that. This was a no-brainer for them, and this was not even a difficult thing in their estimation. They were like, oh, yes, absolutely, we'll be able to work with media, we'll be able to put the message out, and they did, and they have done so to this very day. Now, the first part of what you said to me is actually very interesting, which is, the relationship between lying in general, which the U.S. and other governments do all the time, and then the specific lie about the UFO situation. That's what I think you were getting at. Yes. And I think there's a tie-in the sense that if we live in such a crazy kind of fictitious official version of reality, I think sometimes it's important for us to step back about 10 paces and just see just how nutty it actually is, the things that people are supposed to believe. When someone turns on CNN or NBC, do they actually believe what they're being told? These people who are actually perfectly coiffed and exactly, they look like, literally like talking heads, actors, actresses, and they're part of a massively powerful corporate structure. Does anyone actually believe them? I don't even know, but the reality that they put out there is it's a powerful kind of mean-spirited, angry sort of reality in which everything the U.S. military does is right. And it's tied into just one lie after another. So it seems to me if the truth and the lies about ISIS. Oh my goodness. Beg your pardon. I had an alarm on my phone for some reason, just went off.
It's okay.
My apologies. So if the truth and the lies about ISIS, or if the truth and the lies about 9/11, or if the truth and the lies about the anthrax scare, remember anthrax, if any of that stuff comes out and people realize how badly they've been hosed by government lies, then the question is, will we put two and two together publicly and recognize that, wow, there's actually an entire web of lies, and they're all interrelated, and that includes the UFO reality? That's a magical question there, and I don't know the answer. I did co-author a book a couple of years ago called AD After Disclosure, and my co-author and I examined to some extent, if the UFO secret were to get out, how might that affect other secrets? And it seems to me that it would affect them. Like, if people realize that they've been lied to about UFOs, they're going to look at 9/11, they're going to look at John F. Kennedy's assassination, they're going to look at, a whole array of issues. So I think that there's a tie-in.
There
could be. Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. I have a couple comments and a question with what you just said, but we are actually joined briefly by Jimmy Church, who comes on right after Fade to Black. Jimmy.
Richard, how are you, sir?
Hi, Jimmy. Nice to hear your voice. I'm doing very well. How are you?
It's always great to hear yours. But listen, I've got to jump. I was just listening to the show. I was compelled to call in because check this out. Today, I don't know if you know this, but today Turner Broadcasting pulled CNN from our satellite service. Now, for the first day in years, I haven't had to watch CNN. It's a blessing in disguise. I feel kind of weird, but I feel good about it,
Cut the cord, my man. Cut the cord.
Yeah, exactly. I was so angry at first, and just listening to you right now, that's exactly how not only you feel, but it's how I feel. And you know what? I'm not going to push the issue. I'm not. I'm gonna write it out. I'm gonna cut the cord.
The only reason you want to watch that, I see CNN only when I fly, because when I'm at an airport, it seems like it must be U.S. policy. I'm not joking. Like, every airport in the country must have like CNN blaring from wherever you're sitting. So I see it then, and that's the only time, literally the only time I see CNN is when I'm at an airport. And every time I see it, it's kind of like a shock to me. Like, this is just such blatant propaganda, and everyone's just kind of casually. Are they watching it? Do they believe it? I'd like to know. But no, the only reason to study CNN is to see what we're being told to believe. That's it. They're like the priests.
It's totally interesting to watch CNN, switch the channel, and see how somebody else's take is. And usually it's word for word the same. Therefore, we're not getting anything objective. And I think that is what's traumatic for all of us. I did read your post today about that when you were at I forget what airport you were at, and you said that, and it caused me to stop and pause.
A couple of weeks ago that was.
Yeah. I caught the post today, but listen, I don't want to interrupt your guys' show. Richard, all the best. Sorry I can't make it out to Travis's shindig. You guys are going to have a great time out there.
Yeah, Travis Walton's got a great thing going on in I think in Heber, Arizona. I'll be out to LA before long. I've got other things happening there.
Well, stop by the house. You know what to do. I'll talk to you, Richard. See you, John.
All right, Dr. J, or Jimmy. I'll talk to you soon.
Dr. J.
I know. I was going to say you're I know.
Isn't that a song?
Bye, guys.
Dr. J.
I'll listen to the rest of the show in the studio.
All right, Jimmy. Thanks again. Well,
bye-bye.
Richard, going back to what you're saying, I completely agree with you. These mainstream media, they're just fear-mongering. They're controlled by a handful of people. Going back to 1947 when they were doing a press release or the wire was interrupted and said, do not continue this transmission from the FBI. And this goes back to if not earlier. So I clearly am, it's just, I don't think anybody can deny, unless the people are still living in their little bubble, them not understanding what's going on around the world. I don't think people can deny that the mainstream media is feeding us nothing but BS. And now we have alternative media. People can be at a demonstration in the Middle East, something's going on, they film it, right away it's uploaded to YouTube before a mainstream media can even cover that story, it's already gone viral. And then you have places like this Dark Matter Radio Network where we're bringing you the truth. This is where you're going to find it. You're not going to find it on CNN. You're not going to find it on MSNBC or any of those stations. And I totally agree with you. Like you said, going to all those airports and seeing CNN there, it's just, again, I think it's to fearmongers and to take away our rights. Everything from the guns, the shootings. Okay, well, they want to take away our Second Amendment. The Patriot Act, they want to spy on us without wireless, without warrants. Everything that goes on and on. The criteria it takes for the Patriot Act, for them to qualify you as someone who's a suspect to, not even a suspect, that's not even the proper word. Suspect means you're even past possibly committing a crime. Someone of interest. That's all you need. The criteria to meet that level on the legal standard is so low. All they have to do is that person. You know, they look at your age, your race, where you've traveled, or even what you've emailed or what you said, because the algorithms are so amazing.
That's right.
From the moment
we're in a completely new era.
From the moment we've been talking, they've already cross-checked our phone records, both of ours, our emails, and read through every email and used through for your contacts and those contacts and those contacts. They probably have the files on anybody in a computer system as it is. It's a very scary thought. Now, here's my question. Let's just assume that you were president, but I don't even think he's the one in power because we know there's the secret government. So let's just assume MJ-12 is still in charge of the world or the cabal, as the Honorable Paul Hellyer was telling us last week. If you were in charge, how would you handle the situation? Because as you said earlier, we are in a web of lies. And to uncover the UFO lie would uncover so many, we would be literally hanging people for treason for what they've done to this country.
Yeah, this is you ask a good question. And in fact, I'll mention AD after disclosure again, because this is a theme that Bryce Zabel and I actually explored. In other words, not from the point of view of the U.S. president, but we can explore that. But just to say you're the leader of another nation, like leader of Brazil, doesn't really matter, and you decide personally that it's in the public interest and humanity's interest to tell the truth about the reality of UFOs. So you plan to do it, but here's your problem. You know that every single thing you do is being monitored by the America's NSA, and that's fact. So the NSA has your phone, NSA has got your office phone, NSA has got all of your communications, your emails. And so if you were to plan to do this, you would have to do it secretly outside the power structure of the NSA and everything that's connected to it. And you'd have to be very, very careful and then very swift and flawless in your execution. Don't screw up because everything could go wrong. And if they found out long enough in advance, maybe a little accident would happen to you. Who knows? This is like the mafia. That's exactly what it's like. So if you're the U.S. president, if I or you or some other concerned citizen were a U.S. president and they said, it's time to talk about the reality of UFOs, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, because if I were U.S. president, I would still need to, or I would feel the need to get access to classified reports on the reality of this. And A, that's not a given. And then B, there have been a few stories along the way that have given people reason to think that when these presidents have been told the reality, as I think happened with Jimmy Carter back in 1977, that whatever they were told was enough to upset them very deeply, whatever that was. Now, I had a story that was told to me by a man who was very high level, prominent within CIA, a brilliant man, who told me explicitly, in explicit detail, his knowledge of the briefing of Jimmy Carter in 1977, June of that year. He did not know what Jimmy Carter was told, he said to me, but he did know that at the end of the briefing, Carter was seen with his head in his hands, elbows on his desk, essentially sobbing. So something was told to him to upset him. So what I'm saying here is that if we were to get the secret of this out as president, we would have to be very, very careful, very persistent. You'd have to, it's like a game in which you can't tip your hand. You can't let the other guy, the national security apparatus, know what you're trying to do, because they would stop you at every step of the way.
You're absolutely correct, and that's a very scary thought. And going back to Jimmy Carter, during his campaign, obviously when he was governor of Georgia, he had a sighting, and he went as far as reporting it. And there's a full report. Everyone has seen it. I know specifically you have as a researcher. But then during his campaign, he was promising that he would disclose what's going on with UFOs. And as you said, in 1977, he was given a briefing that put his head in his arms. And I probably fear that the briefing was along the lines of the truth, that we were never in control, and we are we are tied in with the visitors to such a level, to the experiments that they're doing, to the bases here, to whatever we could speculate on. Threatened and said, if you disclose, we're going to if you don't toe the line, you're in trouble. In essence,
we'll go all Kennedy on you. Who knows, something like that. I think that I think actually everything that you just said, I tend to agree with. Relating to, what was the first thing you said there? God, it was interesting. And I thought, yes, I like that. It'll come back to me.
The President Carter, 1977, toeing the line, or his report that he's filed.
Yeah. Well, it'll come back to me. But then the idea of being threatened. I think that. I remember what I was going to say. The idea that these other beings that are here and that we're kind of intertwined with them. Now, this is speculation, but I think this is actually the most likely scenario, and I would say that because not only other researchers, but I have also interviewed individuals who have very strong connections to U.S. military and strong connections to family members who've dealt with recovered ET technology. I've collected a number of these stories myself personally. Other researchers have collected their own stories. There's little doubt in my mind at this point that there has been a crash retrieval program in place that I say that loosely, the U.S. military has had access to exotic alien extraterrestrial technology. And to that extent, it would not be a stretch, to be perfectly honest, that there would be some level of collaboration, whether it's explicit or just implied, but that there could be something like that without a doubt. And then the other thing about the threats. I remember back in 2003 when Colin Powell gave his pack of lies to the United Nations about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I actually watched it on TV in my living room, and I stood up many, many times and I shouted BS, except I shouted the full version of that, pointing at the screen. I was so angry because I knew that they were lies. And I would ask myself, why did Colin Powell lie? Well, there were even rumors then, because I remembered hearing them, that he was threatened through his son Michael Powell, who himself is a horrible, mendacious person, head of the FCC for a while, but that his son was threatened if he didn't tell the truth. I don't know if this is true or not, but I remembered hearing this rumor. But it is true from a source no less than Catherine Austin Fitts, who was number 2 at Housing and Urban Development under George Bush Sr. Catherine's a friend of mine, I'm proud to say. She's gone rogue, gone renegade. Catherine has stated explicitly that when you get to a certain level in U.S. government, that you are sit down with by FBI or CIA or NSA, and they let you know that they've got the goods on you. They know every little website you shouldn't have gone to and that you went to. They know every little dalliance that you've ever had in your life that you want to keep quiet. They know every little bit of tax evasion and fraud and anything else that you've done. They've got it all, and they've got you completely blackmailed.
Always.
So they control you on that basis. And if that's not enough, they can control you more. And I'll just tell a story this is to me from astronaut Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14, 6 men to walk on the moon. A number of years ago, I had written to Edgar and I said, you've mentioned a few times about your knowledge explicitly of two individuals, highly placed individuals, who told you explicitly about alien bodies and technology. And my question to him was, look, I realize you can't give them away their identities, but can you tell me anything that's helpful about them? And he wrote back, he said, listen, I'd like to, but I can't. And the reason is the people who came to me did so at great risk, professionally, personally, and risk to their families. And he said, and I cannot give them up. It would be too dangerous. This is an astronaut, Apollo 14 astronaut, saying this to me. Risk to their families. What does that tell you? This is a serious business here.
That they're absolutely threatening them. And God bless Dr. Edgar Mitchell. I've interviewed him 3 times this year. He's actually poised to join us here on this show in the next couple months. He talks about Roswell. He talks about the experience he had on the way back from the moon that opened up his consciousness, and he started the noetic.org. But I got the feeling, he even mentioned flying over Area 51 while being in the Navy and never even being threatened. But I got the direct feeling that he wasn't telling us everything, and I didn't want to push the poor guy.
Oh, I think he's backed away. I mean, I'll just say it. I've tracked his statements on this matter. He started in 1997, was the first time that he was quoted in any source that I've been able to find, saying, because it's one thing to talk about, he grew up in Roswell. I mean, Edgar Mitchell grew up in Roswell, New Mexico. It's
in high school.
Thing.
That's right.
Yeah. And he knew a lot of those people, and he's, in later years, he's been talking about his connections to those government/military officials, and he's never given their names up, who he said have told him explicitly about deep black programs to study alien technology and bodies. And he said this. He said this in 97. He said it a couple of times in subsequent years, and then he stopped saying it, and he doesn't say that. Now, I have a feeling I know who one of those individuals is, and he wouldn't confirm it or deny it, but I think one of those individuals is a man that I interviewed briefly named Admiral Thomas R. Wilson, who was head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs back under the Clinton years. I don't know who the other one is, but these are, when you're a moonwalking astronaut, who's not going to want to be your best buddy? You can pretty much have an audience with many, many important people. And so you can have access. And here's a moonwalking astronaut, a PhD, a brilliant man, a good man. And he said this for many, many years. And, news media doesn't follow up. Of course, we know that story. We talked about that. But, I think Edgar Mitchell has gone a little bit silent on that issue. That's my take on it.
It's really sad. I remember the last time before Larry King went off CNN, and he had him on there, and that Bill, the science guy, and was trying to debunk him. And at one point, Dr. Mitchell got so upset or offended, he said, "Do you want to hear the story or not?" And you could just hear it. It's like, what kind of disrespect, Bill, the science guy, do you have for an American patriot? I mean, this guy
it has nothing to do with respect. I don't know Bill Nye personally, but listen, these are people with agendas.
Yes.
And when you look at the news media, the official news media, New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, they are pit bulls on a mission. And they don't care about respecting other people. They must disable certain types of stories. And the UFO story is absolutely one that they have to disable. My assumption, and Bill Nye can refute this if he wishes, be my guest, but my assumption is he's doing their work. I mean, really, what are his credentials? He's a nobody. He's this TV guy. Who really cares about him? That's all he is. He's not an actual scientist. He's a TV personality who pretends to be a scientist. So he's out there, and so this is his job in the media. It is to defend official establishment reality and to attack however he needs to anything that challenges that. Yeah, that's my take on him.
There's a few of them that I think are just pure paid debunkers that are doing nothing but that. And from what I hear, they get paid a lot of money. Whereas Dr. Roger Lear told me for an appearance on a television show, they would give him a few $100. The debunker, Joe Nichols or Michael Shermer or Robert Schaefer or the other guy who Migaha, they would get
Joe.
$5,000 to $10,000, and they were specifically brought there to debunk them. Now, this is one thing I've noticed. Watching documentaries in the 80s, you would, for every 1 minute of UFOs, there'd be a minute and a half of for debunkers, and it would always end on the fact, well, chances are it's nothing. Then in the 90s, there was a little shift where it was about a little more equal time, but still, again, the debunkers were there. But in the mid 2000s and to current, you now have shows like the one that you star in, Hangar One, which are telling us the truth. And I'm actually truly shocked that they don't bring any debunkers. And that makes me really happy.
They can't. Here's why. This is my theory, because we have the internet, we have YouTube. And the fact is, the reality is that when people watch these things, the debunkers are so utterly banal and uninteresting. And usually, sometimes they have good points. I'm not saying that we have nothing to learn from them. We do. But the fact is, their contribution to these shows is, I think people understand that there is something very important to this reality. And so because there's YouTube, because there's so many other options, television programmers have realized they really have to deal with this in a more responsible and a more upfront way. Otherwise, they're just going to lose their viewers. People won't put up with it. They have other options.
Yes, I agree, and it's really, really sad. I have so many more things to talk about. Honestly, I could spend days in a row and weeks in a row. We'd run out of time.
You have me back on.
Always. I was hoping to give the callers an opportunity just for a couple minutes. Maybe we'll take 3 calls at the most. Callers out there, please keep it brief, your questions brief. That way we can continue this program. The number to call in is 818-923-1713. Again, 818-923-1713. Now, you appeared at the citizen hearing, and I commend Stephen Bassett, and that's why I continually work with him. We've had everybody from most of the witnesses I've interviewed, and the committee members. As a matter of fact, Congressman Cook is coming back in a couple weeks here, Senator Gravel, December 2nd, and I want to keep this alive because I think we made more of an impact there than ever. But the problem is where was the mainstream coverage of this? This was a very serious event. You had military witnesses, you had colonels, you had generals from Iran, you had everybody, and I just do not understand how it's even possible for them to do this. As a matter of fact, here I'm going to continue with that question, but we do have a caller. I believe this is straight from the UK. If I recognize this, Johnny Webb, you calling from the UK?
Yeah, good evening, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Hi, Richard.
I believe
Johnny, you're getting a little feedback.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Yeah, Richard, I wanted to...
That this seems to have been in service for some time, and it's it's very high tech. I wish I had a little more information to tell you about it. Last couple of days, I've been in the middle of a publishing project, and I've got a couple of other things going on. Have you learned anything about it? Maybe you can tell me.
He actually disconnected, but Ivan's this. Basically, in 1984-85, there was an article published in the New York Times that says this multi-billion-dollar military space program was scrapped, and the spin on it was the money that was lost. But it had nothing to do with, talking about we had a military space program. It's like, what?
It was that's right. This is out of Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, and if I'm not mistaken, base in Colorado as well. I'm drawing a blank at the moment, but yeah, there was a military space program. This is right, military astronauts, and it had been going for a certain period of time. Billions of dollars had gone into it. This is not 83, but I think 86, 87. It was by journalist William J. Broad, B-R-O-A-D. And just as you say, it mentioned that this had been a program and that they now felt, well, it's a little too dangerous. We need to, we don't want to endanger our astronauts on space missions, so we're gonna pull it. And, again, the implication is, well, wait, what? What are you talking about? You had a military classified space program run out of Vandenberg? Well, gee whiz, we'd like to know a little bit more about that. So there's always been, I think, a classified component to the space program, and my feeling is that this probably goes right back to the very beginning of our space program. I was in conversation with one. Again, this is another. I got to get his name out. He's a high-level source that I was just recently chatting with, who just said to me explicitly, I need to see him in person, but he's an elderly retired NASA official who explicitly said that there was not one NASA mission ever that was not monitored by a UFO, that did not have an encounter in one way or another with UFO. He said every single one. That means from the Mercury missions back in the early 60s right up to the space shuttle era.
And even currently, there's been a lot of video that I've seen, and anybody can see this. Just go onto the ISS live streams, and you will see anomalous objects that are around this International Space Station. And the ironic part, which is not really irony when we're talking about ufology, is they happen to shut the stream down and claim that it's a technical error of some sort, and then they bring it back after that object's gone. And this is not once, this is not twice. I've seen this at least 4 times over this last summer. And clearly, we are being monitored up there. Now, I'm going to go back to what we were saying. Citizen hearing. Stephen Bassett put on an incredible event.
So why no media coverage?
Why no media coverage? And I want to commend you, because you are actually one of the premier people who briefed them on the opening day. But not only did we not have the media coverage, I'm hoping that we can when the DVDs are finally delivered to Congress, do you think we'll actually have a change, or do you think we're not?
I mean, I don't want to jinx things, but
neither do I.
I'm not expecting anything to come out of this. I think that they're valuable. I think the citizen hearings were a very valuable thing. And let me just have a minute to explain my take on it. As you say, I was very active that entire week. And what were the citizen hearings? If someone is not aware, basically it was organized by Stephen Bassett, who's an activist on the matter of UFOs. And ending the truth embargo, as he calls it. So it was a week-long mock congressional hearing in the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where 40 researchers and direct witnesses gave testimony all week long before 6 recently retired members of U.S. Congress and Senate. So we would sit at the table, we would give testimony just like you'd see in a congressional hearing, and that's what we did, and it was videoed, and it was very well done. And yes, I was a very active part of that. So there had never been anything like this, and there was a little bit of mainstream media coverage. All of it was dismissive. All of it was in the form of ridicule. These guys get their marching orders. If they had actually covered this in an intelligent, rational way, what they would have seen, which is what everyone else saw, which is that these members of Congress over the course of a week were absolutely, positively converted to the reality that this was an important matter and probably something really bizarre, but absolutely something that deserved and demanded public attention. Every one of them. And I saw that transformation myself, and anyone with a brain in their head could see it. This is not what journalists discussed, of course. They actually, one friend of mine, a colleague, was accosted by a Washington Post who said, "Oh, you're one of the tinfoil hat people." I mean, that's literally what he said to this person. So that tells you where they're coming from.
We're still getting that ridicule. I'm going to come back to that right now. We're going to take our last caller. I know this is a big fan of this Dark Matter Radio Network, and this is David Matherly. David, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dr. J. How are you doing? Thanks for taking the call, and it's a pleasure to speak to Richard Dolan. I was wondering, I heard, I listened to Richard's show. I listen to your show every Monday whenever I get the chance, and I've heard you mention about somebody told you about remote viewers viewing the far side of the moon,
yes.
And they had alluded to that there was an alien installation on the far side of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, and I know
That's
that you also had your breakaway civilization conference. I believe that was your conference that was held a few months ago, and I think it was Robert Morningstar who gave a presentation there, and he claims that there was a possible attack on the military installation. He says there's photos of the backside of the moon, and there's some new craters that look like a nuclear attack had occurred. And from a different source entirely, from a man named Jim Willey, who lives in Costa Rica. He's an economic analyst and a statistician. He claims that in 2009, one of his clients told him, and the client who was pretty high up in the government told him that we attacked the lunar installation on the backside of the moon in 2009. Have you heard anything about this? Is this well known?
David, thank you so much for this question, David. I really appreciate it, and it's nice chatting with you as well. The individual, I'll treat one of these one at a time. First of all, I do think in general that there is important activity there, and I realize that someone who doesn't follow this subject, they might think, well, that sounds crazy, but I'm telling you, there is so much in the form of informed, quietly made statements that it's just impossible for me to ignore. The individual who told me about remote viewing the far side of the moon, this is Russell Targ, who is one of the leaders of the CIA-sponsored remote viewing program in the 1970s out of Stanford Research Institute. And Russell Targ explicitly told me that in the early 1980s, one of his jobs was to train remote viewers at Fort Meade, Maryland, whose job was to remote view the far side of the moon. And I said, well, why would they do that, Russell? And he said, well, why do you think? A little bit of a pause. I said, well, were they looking for E.T.? He said, yes, they were going to be looking for E.T. This is the early 80s. I said, did they find E.T.? He said, well, that wasn't part of my job, and I don't have information on that. He wouldn't tell me. But I believe him. I believe that this was the case. So that at the very late, in the early 80s, we had reason to think that there was someone on the backside of the moon. So fast forward, yes, I'm familiar with what Robert Morningstar said about this. I haven't really fully examined this claim, but I think Robert is a good researcher. It's entirely possible that this is the case. I really ought to analyze it myself and see, the before and after pictures and so forth if we have them. Put it this way: if you've got what I conceive of as a breakaway civilization, that is a black budget world basically on steroids with ET technology tossed in there with classified patents that no one else in the outside world is allowed to fulfill or move ahead on, but they can. That means they can develop anti-grav in some form or other. They can develop electrogravitics. They can develop magnetic types of propulsion systems. They can go off-world a lot more easily. And then, when you get there, can you find a way to extract oxygen out of the ground of the moon? Well, there's oxygen down there, as we discovered. So maybe they can. All you need is oxygen and the source of energy, and you can have an installation there. It's not that hard. It's like having an installation under the ocean floor, which we also have been able to do for years. You just need oxygen and energy. So if they can get that, they can do it. Why would they do it? Well, they might do it because there's other beings there, and it's important to have some kind of interaction or monitoring, or who knows why they'd want to do it. What I believe, and this is only my belief, I can't say that I know this, but if I were doing my own counterintelligence and someone were employing me to say, well, what do you think's going on? I would say, I think that's going on. There's an entire infrastructure back there, and it's very, very important. And, the backside of the moon is always facing away from Earth. Always. So you could have, in theory, you could have an enormous amount of activity there, and you could do it with a great amount of relative secrecy. So ultimately, I can't say that I know one way or another, but I do believe that there's something important going on.
Well, I think the backside of the moon is a perfect place for them to be watching us. In essence, because like you said, it never faces Earth. It's a perfect, I guess, quasi base. As Stanton Friedman always says, these little small vehicles that we're seeing, the little saucers, they're the Earth excursion vehicles. They're not the ones that are actually traveling from dimensions or bringing their entire civilization or whatever it be. They're those little scout ships, the reconnaissance ships. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're parked right there on that side of the moon, and they're sending them back here. Now, anyway, going back to what we were saying about the citizen hearing, I think it was truly offensive for someone to say that, you're one of the tinfoil hat people.
Oh,
there
yes,
was
absolutely.
5 retired congressmen and 1 retired senator. I watched the hearings from beginning to end all day, every day, including the lectures at night, remotely. I wasn't there, but I watched them. And I saw the transformation. Every day,
exactly.
The 5 congressmen and senator were given interviews, and you could just see them going from, well, yeah, it's possible, to not only to it's becoming from possible to unequivocally, we are being visited by 1 or more extraterrestrial species or extra-dimensional species, and 2, B, that the government's been hiding it from us. At least the U.S. government, if not other governments, have been hiding it for so long. And the people that testified, we had top researchers such as yourself, Linda Moulton Howe, just to name a few, Grant Cameron, Kevin Randall, but we had other witnesses. Colonel Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr., who was, I don't understand how people could still belittle him even now that the poor guy's passed away. To General Jafari, the Peruvian Air Force man. All these people were there. How they are so credible and unimpeachable. For a comment to say something along the lines of tinfoil hat is just purely disgusting in my mind. I mean, I really wish I could get my hands around those people's necks, but I don't want to go that far. Point being, though, this
totally understand.
Yeah, this just goes to show that the mainstream media does not care about. They're censoring. They're towing the line for the government.
It's an explicit agenda. And they just have to do what they do. I don't want to get too far off track, but they're doing the same thing right now. There's a recent movie that's just come out called Kill the Messenger, and it's about the deceased journalist Gary Webb, who back in the early mid-1990s wrote a series of articles about the CIA, cocaine trafficking, the Medellin cartel, crack cocaine, and I mean, this is a level of journalism that it comes once in a lifetime for someone. It was heroic journalism. And Gary Webb was destroyed by the New York Times, by the Washington Post, by the LA Times. I mean, they went after him, literally hiring dozens of journalists to discredit him. And this is how it went down at the time. So there was a movie that just came out about Gary Webb that, is very supportive of Gary Webb, as it should be. Gary Webb, by the way, died of officially speaking, 2 self-inflicted gunshot wounds to the head. 10 years or so, I think 8 years after his article came out. So, however you want to interpret that. 1 shot supposedly went through his cheek, and we're told that he was so despondent that he tried it a second time and got himself through the brain. In any case, the New York Times and the Washington Post have each just recently put out hit pieces on Gary Webb yet again. I mean, they just don't stop. It's a decade later, and it's 2 decades after his article, and they're still attacking him. They're still belittling him. They're still saying he wasn't a real journalist. Who are these people? They have to do this, despite the fact that man was a real journalistic hero. They have to go after him. They have to destroy him because this is an explicit agenda, because they get their marching orders from somewhere else. And it's the same with UFOs. It's the same with so many things. It's the same with 9/11. It's the same with, the infantile coverage of what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. It's there, relating to the absurdly stupid coverage of what's happening in the Middle East. They must report things a certain way. It is a propaganda directive.
And if they don't, like you said, they're blacklisted. Their careers are ruined, and their families might be threatened. I remember this. I don't think it was UFO related, but it was on an Unsolved Mysteries episode, probably about 15, 20 years ago at this point, where this man was about to blow the whistle on whatever department he was working for, and he came home where he couldn't speak. He said that they took away his ID badge and they had sprayed something in his throat where he couldn't talk, and he was writing to his wife what he really was and who he really worked for. This guy wore a bulletproof vest. He was scared for his life. They found him shot in the head in the middle of the desert. You know what the ruling was? Suicide. You telling me someone fearing for their life wearing a bulletproof vest is going to kill themselves? I mean,
these are people who are suicided. They were suicided.
Yes.
They were murdered. Yeah, I mean, the thing about this UFO mystery, this phenomenon, to me, I fell into this 20 years ago. I wasn't expecting to spend my whole life with it, but here I am 20 years later. I'm still delving into it. I thought I would look into it for a few months and figure out for myself whether I thought there was something to it. Well, I found out that there was something to it, and it's never let me go, not once over the last 2 decades. It's fascinating to me for so many reasons. It's fascinating just intrinsically. What is it that is going on? Who and what are these other beings that obviously are traversing the skies and the oceans of this planet and orbit and beyond of this planet? There's no question that there is a significant presence of some sort of what I call other. I mean, I think that some of them, I think maybe most of them are extraterrestrial, but I don't really know what they are. They're not us. And on top of that, so there's this scientific mystery, right? But then there's all of these other issues that come in, like what is the relationship between the secrecy and what they are, and how is the secrecy kept in place all these years? And I mean, do they do it by, how do they manage the media? How do they manage the political institutions, the academic world, the scientific community? All of these are related issues that are affected by the UFO phenomenon. And then you've got the science. Intrinsically in the UFO phenomenon is science that is radical, that is revolutionary, from something as simple as propulsion technology, how do they do what they do, to space-time reality, to dimensions, to consciousness itself, because I think at times there seems to be a mind-to-mind connection that we have with these things. What's that all about? And then, other issues like the nature of contact. What's going on where the rubber meets the road? That is where we're interacting with them. What is the scenario? How many groups are there? What's the black budget world like? Are they monitoring this? They seem to be. And there's this whole kind of rich reality. It's just like, what's going on at the far side of the moon, like David was talking about. There's this massive infrastructure that's being hidden from us. All of these issues and more are part of our current understanding of what the UFO phenomenon really is. This is a lot more than lights in the sky and, an investigator saying, if you held your hand out at arm's length, how would it be the size of a quarter or whatever? I mean, it's a lot more interesting types of questions than that. So this is why it's just kept my attention all these years. It has just not let go. It's the most fascinating subject. And I think it's got tremendous relevancy for our time and for the coming years and generations and centuries. The implications of this are profound.
It absolutely does. And I fear for our generation, the younger generation, and the future generations after that, if we don't change things, the web of lies is just going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. Disclosure has to happen. Now, I don't know if it's going to happen. Like you said, the reason why I fear, I'm backing Mr. Bassett 100%. We're keeping the citizen hearing alive, continually having the witnesses and the committee members on, and we're waiting to see what's going to happen when these DVDs are delivered. 5,000 of them, they're going to go to Congress and to their aides, so that way everybody has a chance to see them. But are they going to be forced to not have a congressional hearing to toe the line? That's what my fear is. And the reason why I fear this is, yes, maybe during the Roswell era, things went to Wright-Patterson, and at the time then they built Area 51, which might have been the very first non-official, non-military, but militaristic base that was run by Black Ops. But what I fear is that the alien artifacts, alien technology, these crash discs and possibly bodies are now being held by private corporations.
Right.
Private corporation doesn't have to answer the American people, so we can protest all we want, and they could say, sorry.
No, exactly. And this has been my opinion for quite some time, that the secret has become not so much classified as it is proprietary. It's a big difference. So the question is, I'm going to be efficient here because I know we're getting toward the end, but the question is, when you're looking at secrecy, what's the relationship there between military and private corporations? And I think it's a close relationship. And I think that what we're dealing with now is a secret that is quasi-public and quasi-private. Public meaning quasi-government and quasi-private. It's all secret. So think of it, of the black budget special access programs. These are classified programs, and they're called black because they're hidden, they're dark. Congress can't even see them, what they are. but they're real. So, and they're under classified kind of regulations. But within those special access programs, what the few studies, public studies about them that exist, all indicate, and they all agree, that the special access programs are dominated not by official military Defense Department personnel. Rather, they are dominated by the private contractors, Lockheed, Raytheon, General Electric, General Dynamics, Boeing. They're the key players, and that the military is like a junior partner in most of these. If that's so, let's look at the UFO phenomenon. That would probably fit the bill, so that you've got technology that is of world-changing importance. And of course you're going to have it, give it to Lockheed. Of course you're going to give it to General Electric. I mean, these are the guys with the research and development. They got the engineers. They have the ability to do something with it. They'll take the lead, but they're under military protection in a classified world, and everyone wins. I mean, everyone in that world wins. You know, they're making a fortune because they hold the future in their hands. The military generals, when they retire, they become senior VPs at those companies, and they're making a fortune. It's all a happy little family.
And they get to stay in the top 1%. Mr. Dolan, we're down to the last minute or so. I wanted to give you a minute to tell everybody your final message. And, of course, it's always been a pleasure speaking with you. We'll definitely pick this up more. Tell people where to find you and what's next for you.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure having this chat with you, by the way. I really enjoyed your questions. My website, best way to keep up on what I'm doing is richarddolanpress.com. I have the company Richard Dolan Press. It's a publishing company, and I'm publishing more and more books, leading edge books by some amazing people on these types of cutting edge issues, whether it's UFOs or anything related. I just published a new book by Dr. Bruce Maccabee on the FBI, CIA, UFO connection. I have others on the way. So that's richarddolanpress.com. I'm doing a number of public appearances. I'll be at Travis Walton's Skyfire conference in, I think, November 6th, 7th in the middle of Arizona there. You can look that up. I'm doing a thing, I think, in Brazil for AJ Givard at the end of November. I'm doing an event with Catherine Austin Fitz in New York City in December. I'll put that on my website. I'll be in Phoenix a few times in the near future in January, and then in, I think, February for a couple of different things, and then more.
And that brings us to an end. Everybody, stay tuned next week. Join us for Linda Moulton Howe the following week, for Jaime Maussan, then Senator Congressman Cook. This is Dr. J signing off.